Well, welcome everyone. Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Bob Gleason, and I have the honor of serving as professor and the Albert A. Levin Chair of Urban Studies and Public Service here at the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Studies and Urban Affairs at Cleveland State University. Welcome to our Levin College Forum today. This is one in a long series over many decades of forums where part of our mission of the Levin College is to assemble people from the community, assemble researchers from our college, and explore issues that are relevant to the dynamics of our vibrant urban region of the Cleveland metropolitan area and all of Northeast Ohio. Our topic today has the title of Inconvenient Truths about Suburbanization Without Growth. This is a great topic that allows us to bring together pieces of our mission, which is to inform and improve the decision makers in whose hands the fate of the quality of life in our region often rests. Let me give you a quick rundown of how our program will be organized today. I'll make some basic introductions, and then we'll lead off to presentations. We will have 3 research presentations today by members of our faculty. We will then follow those research presentations with an expert panel of discussants who will ask questions, raise issues, interact with the presenters, and we will then have time at the end for questions and answers from you, our audience. So welcome to this event, and let me kick off with just a bit of a comment about why we picked this topic. We are in the pandemic. We are meeting this way. We are in an unprecedented period of time. But as we start thinking about what happens next and where this region will be going, one of the important contexts that we have is what types of American dreams do we have for the future of this region of Northeast Ohio. In the past, thinking collectively as a region, we have developed a couple of different overall goals that we need to work towards achieving. We know that we are a region that has decentralized a lot. We've come together as a region in the last decade and said that it is our aspiration to try to reinforce the urban cores that have become weakened in the process of decentralization. Right? That's been one of our collective goals. Another collective goal is we know that as a region, we have not been producing jobs at the rate that the nation has. We have been falling behind, and we know we need to do better on that issue. And third, we know very well and very profoundly that the distribution of the benefits of our economy are quite inequitable. And we have enormous challenges of finding ways to grow that can reinforce our urban centers, to create more jobs, to increase the quality of life of our residents, and to produce those jobs and grow in ways that directly addresses some of our serious issues of social equity. Those are our American dreams. Right? But in order to pursue those dreams, we need to know what is going on in the region, and we need to know how do we go about working together. Right? So today we have 3 presentations from faculty members here at the college. The first presentation is by Professor Sandra Kaufman, who will be giving a presentation on the title, "The Process, Employment Location Patterns in Economic Regions, Modeling Complex Dynamics." Right? Professor Kaufman also serves as director of two of our master's degree programs here in environmental studies and in urban studies. Our second presentation is Professor Joanna Ganning, who serves as our Associate Dean, as well as directing the Urban Planning and Development Master's Program. And Professor Ganning's presentation is entitled Impacts for Legacy Cities, Job Suburbanization and Central City Decline. Our third presentation is Professor Megan Rubidoux, who teaches primarily in our Master's of Public Administration program. And her presentation is Responses, Fostering Interlocal Collaboration to Overcome the Zero-Sum Game. So the combination of these presentations, we're looking at the process and the phenomenon of suburbanization without growth, and the consequent how do we go about collaborating with each other in this zero-sum environment that we're currently in. So with that introduction, I'd like to call on Professor Kaufman to begin her presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Gleason, for a wonderful introduction. I would like to share my screen at this point, and I would, let's see if I did it. Is it visible? My screen? I hope so. And I would like to first share any glory or blame with my colleagues, Mark Salling from the Levin College and Myron Kaufman from the Department of Physics at Cleveland State. And so what I am going to talk about today is the reason why we generate regional anticipatory scenarios to inform local policy decisions. I will present an example, which is a validated spatial model for regional employment location. And I will show you the test case of our region and present a couple of intervention scenarios for it. And then I'm going to mention a few future developments that we're thinking about.
Excuse me, Dr. Kaufman, just wanted to let you know that the screen is not visible to the audience.
Thank you for your help. I am not sure why that is, but I'm going to try again. All right, now I hope it works.
Yes, we can see now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And let's get back. So what I was showing was my menu today for what I was going to talk about, and I am going ahead with talking a little bit about anticipatory scenarios. They are different from predictions. They are tools to explore what might happen if we do nothing in our region or if we intervene through various decisions. So they are not normative. They are not goals that we are trying to reach. They're not explanatory. They just are useful in telling us perhaps what happens when we make various decisions in the region. And so we are looking at so-called managing the regional commons. And we focus on business location decisions. Business location decisions, of course, affect the region's economy and the environment and quality of life. And they are interdependent in the sense that whatever you do at one location will affect other locations in the region. So planners try to, policymakers try to make decisions, policies, regulations. They try to come up with incentives to locate in specific urban areas and disincentives to locate in green fields and other environmentally sensitive areas. And so the question is, what happens if we make these such decisions in a particular place? Like say we try to benefit Cleveland in some way, will the rest of the region be affected by such plans? And is it possible and useful to anticipate some predictable surprises? And I'm going to show you a little bit more what I mean by that. So we are assuming that the region's localities form a network. They affect each other. And in time, businesses move from places that are less desirable for businesses in the sense that their market potential is below average to more desirable places. Again, from the perspective of businesses, they have a market potential above average. And so what our model is going to do is compute yearly the proportion of the total number of jobs in the region that are going to be found in each municipality in the region, assuming that they behave in the way that we think. And so we try to validate our model by using data from 2001 to 2015. They are publicly available data. And what you see in the left corner is the actual proportion of employment in each of the 261 municipalities of Northeast Ohio. What you see in the right bottom corner in yellow tones is the model proportion. And the question is, are they close? Should we even bother with such a model? Does the model do what we think it's doing? And of course, you can look at it and say, yeah, it looks pretty much the same, but we computed the correlation in time from each year to each year that we have used data from. And you can see that the correlation in year 2015 are pretty high for a model. Usually these correlations drop pretty quickly for predictive models. We are in year 2015 at correlation 0.98, where the maximum is 1. So we're pretty proud of this result. And it gave us the courage to try to now test scenarios, see what happens if we actually tinker with the employment location in the region. By we, I mean, of course, planners and policymakers. First of all, I wanted to show you a few cities that we tested. So you can see that for Cleveland, the model predicts fewer jobs than the actual, but not by much, right? Then the proportions are pretty small. And in Akron, we're right on, like it's like no daylight between the little circles and the model line. And the same in Strongsville and pretty much Westlake. And we can talk about why Cleveland is seemingly a little bit different. But here is an example of a policy scenario where we said, let's implement some policies between 2003 and 2007, where we attract 2% of the total jobs in the region to Cleveland. And then that means that collectively the rest of the cities will lose this 2%. And on the map, you can see that in the year 2015, for which we have actual data, you see in the little map in the right corner, the actual data. We are saying what happens to the region if we implement this policy. And you can see that Cleveland gains, not very much, but it does. But you can also see, compared to the predicted do-nothing model, that some places, mostly in blue and dark blue, gain, and the red and pink lose jobs, right? And so you can ask, what's the point of this tool, is to ask, did we really mean to do that, right? And so here are some cities, for example. So Cleveland, according to the scenario, grows as we planned because we implemented that policy, but then it slowly reverts to what it actually is, but not, there's still some space there. It grew a little bit. Akron seems to have benefited and it doesn't revert to the previous state, but places like Boston Township disappear in terms of employment. They're gone. All the jobs in Boston Township are going to leave. And Lorain is, again, one of the winners, not by much, but the scenario predicts that they will gain a little bit over what is predicted without intervention. Here we have another example of a scenario where we said, what happens if we say that along the Cuyahoga River, we are going to conserve the land and not allow any development for a few years, for 4 time periods again. And because we think that it's an environmentally vulnerable area. So again, you see in the right corner what happens if we don't do anything. And compared to this, we see that Akron and Ashtabula in the Ashtabula County benefit slightly, but most of the other places are actually unaffected, which is to some extent good news, because it says if you implement in that particular area a conservation policy, it's relatively safe. Of course, Cleveland is not probably going to be very happy. It's not going to grow, but so isn't it in the do nothing scenario. So you can say not much is gained, not much is lost. We can go ahead with conservation. So here are some examples of cities. So you can see that Boston Township and Cuyahoga Falls are unchanged. And so is East Cleveland, where you can't even see the difference between the scenario and the do nothing lines. And the same goes for Cleveland. So you can say, well, you can go ahead with this conservation scenario. It doesn't mean that other choices of conservation would have the same effect, but for the ones that we picked along the Cuyahoga River, this is the case. And so in summary, you can see the do nothing in the left upper corner, the do nothing anticipation, but you saw that it was pretty close to reality. So that's why we compared to it. And then the three scenarios, and now you can see that they look relatively different. And we can ask, what if you do this or that? How does the entire region get affected? Which I think is very important. That's what I meant by predictable surprises. You don't want to implement a policy without being aware that it's going to affect other places, perhaps not in the ways that you intended. So that's why we think that this is a useful tool. So to conclude, I wanted to summarize that we found this model to hold well over at least 15 years, which is pretty good for predictions. We got some policy insights from the test scenarios, and we are able to produce ranges of impact if necessary. In other words, test maybe different amounts of intervention. And we, of course, the drawback is that you need a planner, a physicist, and a geographer to pull this off for the time being, but we're confident that we can maybe produce some tool that can be used by others. And we are proposing to test other types and extents of intervention. So right about now, we're testing what happens if we engage in forestation in Northeast Ohio to reduce effects of climate change. And we want to test the model maybe with only consumer establishments. Here, this was all the employment in the region. And in the future, we would like to design an interface to enable public participation. Thank you. I think that the presentation that follows is by Professor Joanna Ganning. So I'm going to stop the share and give her the floor.
Thank you, Sonda. That was an excellent presentation and I enjoyed hearing it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, hopefully everyone can see my slides and can hear me. My name is Joanna Ganning. I'm the Associate Dean in the college and an Associate Professor of Economic Development. I cannot see the chat, so hopefully that's not for me. I can't see the chat. Sorry, technology. Okay. Sorry. So what you just heard, the presentation you just heard was about the process of suburbanization without growth for central cities. And you're going to hear from Dr. Rubidoux here in a few moments about looking at collaboration for, my screen sharing is paused. Hold on. I'm sorry. This is a little bit more complicated than I anticipated. Okay. Okay. You're going to hear from Dr. Rubidoux about using collaboration as a response to suburbanization without growth. And I'm here to fill in the middle of those two pieces to talk about the outcomes of suburbanization without growth in central cities. And in fact, those outcomes are laden with several very inconvenient truths I'm going to walk you through. So my introduction is the first of these inconvenient truths, and that is that the Cleveland region grotesquely overbuilds housing. If you look at our 5-county MSA from 1990 to 2015, we produced 2.5 times more housing than we had new households to fill those units. And virtually all of this happened in the suburban counties. As you can see here, Cuyahoga County actually lost households during this period, while all 4 of the suburban counties gained. This process is strongly similar to a process documented by other scholars in Detroit and is probably happening in other regions as well. But Inconvenient Truth 1A is that it doesn't matter that much how you define the Cleveland geography or even what time period you look at. If you look at the Cleveland urbanized area, which is most of Cuyahoga and Lake counties and small bits of other surrounding counties, and then narrow the time to 2010 to 2018, so a smaller geography and a shorter time period, you still see the same thing. For this geography and this 8-year period, which I'm going to focus a lot on, we still built 16,000 more housing units than we had new households to fill them. And all of this raises a lot of questions for me about where are the houses these people are coming from and what else is moving along with this activity. But before I get to that, inconvenient truth number 2 is that this process appears to be racialized. If you look at shrinking cities, of which Cleveland is one, and this is a list of 80 shrinking cities, I've gone ahead and highlighted the Ohio ones for you, so you can look at them more easily. If you look at all shrinking cities, the MSAs have a percent of their population that's Black or African American that's about 16%. But the central cities, the Clevelands, the Detroits, the Baltimores, the St. Louises of these groups, the central cities themselves have Black or African American populations at 42%. So that is a 25% difference. But if you look at non-shrinking cities, so the Houstons, the Tallahassees, the cities that aren't on this list, you see that the regions are about 13% Black or African American, while the central cities are about 18%. So you see a 5% difference rather than a 25% difference. Now, there's a lot about this I don't know, but when I look at this, I see an inconvenient truth emerging, that our process of suburbanization without growth is racialized, that race and space have a process that is playing out in front of us that is introducing inequality into the system. All of this raises many, many questions for me, 3 of which I'm going to walk through with you. And they are largely about people. The first of these is wondering if you're in a shrinking city, if you're in Cleveland, does that impact your job accessibility just by virtue of the fact that it's a shrinking city? And as a closely related follow-up, is that because of suburbanization without growth? And then all of this really begs the very obvious question. If you're building all those houses that are excess, what's happening to the houses that are left behind? So first up, what is the deal with job accessibility in shrinking cities? So for the people who live in the cities themselves, are they able to access jobs? So I built a regression model because that's kind of what I do here. And I started by controlling for the things the literature widely agrees are centrally explanatory, the things that we know are really closely associated with job accessibility. Total employment in your region, percent of your neighborhood that is not white alone, so percent minority, and then the percent of workers who are low wage. The literature broadly agrees that these things are quite significant in understanding your job accessibility. And then I just asked, do you live in a central city or not? So all of this should tell me with a great deal of confidence what job accessibility looks like for any neighborhood in a shrinking city. And the answer is yes. Inconvenient truth number 3 is that if you live in a shrinking city, other things held constant that ought to impact your job accessibility, yours is about 7% lower than if you lived in the same city that was in a growing region or was not in a shrinking city context. So is this because we have suburbanization without growth? I built another model. I'm going to skip all the technical details of it and show you the end, which is where I calculated job accessibility for 2005, 2010, and 2015 for these shrinking cities and then for other cities. And here again, inconvenient truth number 4, the answer is yes, a resounding and clear yes. On the right side of this, you see non-shrinking cities. Again, your Tallahassees, your Houstons, your Minneapolises, your wherever on the right. And here what we see in the dark green bar is that you have growing regions. And you have the central cities that are enjoying in that growth. They are a portion of that growth. They are enjoying that growth along with their region. But over here in shrinking cities, you have this, the dark green bar is the regional employment loss. So the whole region is contracting, But if the region is losing 5,000 jobs, the city is losing 13,000 jobs, which think about what that means. If the region's only losing 5,000, all 5,000 of those are coming from the city, and another 8,000 are moving from the city into the suburbs, because otherwise this math doesn't work. This is very plainly a process of job suburbanization. And so this answered my question with a resounding yes. If you live in a shrinking city, your job accessibility is depressed because of suburbanization without growth. And then just to hammer this home a little bit more, if you look at the post-recession period from 2010 to 15, shrinking city regions actually grew. We actually saw job growth within these regions. But even while that happened, the central cities still saw losses in job accessibility. And this was, again, because those jobs that were growing in shrinking city regions were happening in the suburbs predominantly, rather than toward the core of these regions. All the way back to my first slide about inconvenient truth number 1. So we see all this excess housing development, and we see jobs following those houses to the suburbs. And this means that an inconvenient truth is that if you live in the city, it really is impacting your job accessibility. And I think this speaks directly to the heart of RTA and their mission. So this gets to the third question I posed. What does all this mean for housing? If we're building all these extra houses, 90,000 houses more than we have households to fill them, doesn't that mean some other house has to go vacant? And the answer here is a resounding yes. Inconvenient truth number 5 is that we're playing musical chairs with housing. In a hypothetical world on the left, if we were overbuilding by 10%, it would mean in shrinking cities that it was creating about a little over 7,000 vacant housing units. But in non-shrinking cities, it would produce only a little over 1,000 vacant housing units. That is to say, if you overbuilt by 10%, it has about 7 times the impact on vacancy in a shrinking city that it would have in a non-shrinking city. And again, this is because we are suburbanizing without growth. We're not gaining new people to fill those units. But 10% is crazy. That almost never happens in reality. Among shrinking cities, the average is about 2.6% regional overdevelopment. And again, that's over an 8-year period. In Cleveland is a 2.2%. So if I do some more fancy math on this and figure out what that means over that 8-year period, it means that Cleveland saw an increase of 1,600 long-term residential vacancies in the city that are directly attributable to our overdevelopment of housing. And that breaks down to 202 per year. If they cost about $10,000 a piece to demolish, then a market intervention would look like about a $2 million fund that would go through impact fees or something similar that could be funneled back to the city or an agency to put toward demolition. I've been told by reviewers that that's too small. It's not worth talking about. 200 units a year is too small to design any policy around. And I think they're wrong. So I called a recent alum of Levin College and a friend and colleague of mine, Max Upton, who's the planning director at the city of Lorain. And I said, Max, would $2 million a year be helpful to the city of Cleveland or to Lorain or to Akron or to other shrinking cities? And he said, absolutely. He said, the importance of demolition, it's impossible to overstate the importance of demolition. And then inconvenient truth number 6, and this one's really the kicker for me, is that in a shrinking city, you uniquely have a vacancy multiplier that does not exist in other settings. This means that if you had a vacant unit 8 years ago, it has produced about a quarter of a newly vacant unit just by its mere existence. Therefore, those 1,600 units that happened because of overbuilding, after 8 years, they'll produce another 400 just simply because they existed. And this doesn't happen in other settings. This is unique to here and super inconvenient in every conceivable way. So in conclusion, these are the 6 inconvenient truths that I know so far in my research agenda about suburbanization without growth. We massively overproduce housing. It appears to be racialized. This context of decline weakens job accessibility, and that does appear to be happening because of ongoing suburbanization without growth. Overbuilding causes massive vacancy in the central city, and we have a vacancy multiplier that other cities do not experience. And those are the inconvenient truths of the outcomes. Thank you so much. I am going to hand the floor over to Dr. Meg Rubidoux, who is going to talk to us about collaboration as a response.
Thank you, Dr. Ganning. Okay, I am going to share my screen now. Hopefully that worked.
It did.
Huzzah. Okay. All right, so the focus of my presentation, following my colleagues, is to talk about approaches that are often pitched as maybe solutions to some of these problems that are being pointed out. So collaboration, interlocal collaboration among local governments is really one of these things that comes up time and again as a solution to problems at the regional scale, especially in the context of home rule states, right, where we have local governments that have an awful lot of power to make their own decisions and policies with respect to their futures. And especially in the context of regional decline or stagnation. So, oops, there we go. So some problems that aim to be tackled, right? So that people sort of bring up collaboration as a solution include a host of collective action problems that are not unique necessarily to areas experiencing regional decline or legacy cities or Rust Belt cities or however you want to refer to these. But these include diseconomies of scale, right? So when there are lots of local governments providing services, particularly if many of those local governments are losing population or other revenue sources, business, there may need to be collaboration on services to capture economies of scale. So collaboration often comes up as sort of a simple solution to a serious collective action problem. And that happens really often, right? We know that local governments engage in this behavior really frequently across contexts. Conservation and greenfield protection is one of the areas that collaboration also gets brought up. Legacy systems and infrastructure. This one is more relevant in the legacy city or Rust Belt context, right? Because you have these really large infrastructure systems that were built for far more people. And then as you've had population shifts, the revenue sources are not there to support and maintain these much larger scale infrastructure systems. That often requires collaboration to solve those kinds of problems. And of course, sprawl. So sprawl is one of these issues, again, not unique to shrinking regions, but particularly wicked in regions experiencing economic and population loss for the reasons that my colleagues have pointed out. So collaboration then can include a few different kinds of flavors, right? So we have consolidation, and this why I wouldn't classify this as collaboration. I would classify this as another solution that's sometimes pitched and sort of popular, a recurring popular idea when there are these kinds of problems that, you know, annex and consolidate local governments. But we know from the literature and we know from applied research that this is actually really, really difficult to do, and that the results of it are quite mixed. So there's no surefire solution there, and it's very, very difficult to do. All right, so in that case, collaboration is often what comes up next, right? So given that we have so many local governments, and given that, sorry, I'm just, okay. Given that we have so many local governments, some of them municipalities, some of them special districts, all doing very rational work at the local level to try to provide the package of services and goods that their constituencies want, how do we get them to collaborate with one another to resolve some of these collective action problems? Sometimes that can be done by special districts like MPOs, like NUACA. Sometimes that can be done through formation of new special districts, which has been successful in some parts of the country. If they have real teeth to do regional work, that's a challenge to achieve though. Non-governmental organizations or quasi-governmental organizations like councils of government or like the first mayors comes to mind. Interlocal agreements, which are typically formal agreements for service sharing. These can be for economic development purposes. These can be for conservation or trail development, right? All kinds of things that interlocal agreements can support. Regional planning, and then informal networks. So informal networks tend to be sort of ubiquitous. They happen across areas, right? So local government leaders at the top level, we're talking about mayors and managers, may have informal networks with each other across boundaries to solve all sorts of problems, economic development, housing, day-to-day sort of service provision. And then you may have sort of functionally specific informal networks of your EMS responder leadership, EMS leadership, or housing leadership, or economic development leadership. And these sorts of informal networks are really neat to study. They are vibrant, they are extremely, there's a lot of variety in the shape of the networks, but even in legacy cities, you have really, really robust networks that operate in this fashion. And we know from the literature, and we know from the applied research on these topics, that collaboration fosters collaboration, that when you get these kinds of networks developing, collaboration for one purpose can lead to new types of collaboration. Networks can broaden and deepen and grow new spurs. And that when you get that, you can achieve sort of new solutions to regional scale problems. There's been a lot of research on how this works, on how cooperation and collaboration for service provision can translate to collaboration for regional scale improvements. But it has not been especially applied to the legacy city or declining population context. And this is really where a lot of my current research situates, that it's a particularly difficult track to get from locally rational collaboration for service provision to locally rational collaboration for regional growth and regional sustainability. Okay, so just a quick note on some of the complicating factors in this region and in legacy city regions in general. They tend to have high levels of local government fragmentation, so lots and lots of smaller municipalities spatially providing distinct goods and services packages. That creates some hurdles and some complications, but it also creates opportunities. We know that in these kinds of regions, there is more intense interlocal collaboration, interlocal competition for tax base, but there's also more connection, more networking, more information sharing. And that can create some real opportunities for regional collaboration, regional scale efforts. There's also, as Dr. Ganning mentioned, a great deal of racial and economic segregation that is in part tied to the nature of these spaces as highly fragmented, and in the population shifts that go along with population decline and shifting to the suburbs sprawl. And then we tend to have central cities that were really, really big, and so there are these political and institutional legacies that tend to wane, but they're still there, and this can create complications for central city collaboration with suburban cities and exurban cities. Sometimes there tends to be this sort of confrontational nature because of the legacy of the size of that central city. In legacy city regions, and particularly in Ohio, we have home rule traditions, home rule constitutional traditions, and typically Republican state control with Democratic Party dominance in the cities and the suburbs, which can again just complicate some of the solutions that might be pitched to improve regional outcomes in these legacy cities. Okay, but we know local governments of all kinds in these regions are collaborating for regional planning, right? They participate in a host of regional scale initiatives, like the ones displayed here, Vibrant Neo, Balanced Growth. This is just a few. A lot of environmentally conservation, metro parks related efforts get a great deal of suburban, exurban, and central city participation. Okay. We also know that local governments across the region are highly engaged in interlocal collaboration for service provision. That's stuff like, ILAs to support police services, fire services, 911 services, roads and infrastructure development, maybe economic development, housing, planning, sharing staff, that kind of stuff. We know that across the board, cities are doing this. Wealthy cities, poor cities. We know cities closer to the center, cities further away from the center. They're all doing it. There are some things that sort of reduce a city's likelihood or the extent of its engagement in this kind of collaboration, but we know it's broadly used across the Northeast Ohio region. At the same time, participation in these regional initiatives is much spottier, and we know that systematically regions, these data were obtained through a survey that was done by the Levin College, initiated by Dean Anglin, and we were able to gauge mayors and managers about their participation in these regional initiatives. So what you see here are these bigger blue dots are municipalities that reported being heavily engaged in lots of regional scale initiatives. And this allowed us to do some modeling to see what predicts why some cities are more engaged in these regional scale efforts, where you would expect there to be a sort of local level buy-in to doing stuff, to taking action for the region. And what we found is that, that being further away from the central city depressed this activity. So there was a negative relationship there. Cities that were further away from the central city were less likely or less engaged in these regional scale initiatives. And cities with high levels of poverty were also less engaged. And we read that as a capacity issue, right? That some of these cities that have really intense problems, localized problems, have less capacity to engage in these regional scale efforts. They just don't have the sort of headspace to dedicate to that. Okay, so some takeaways. The study that we were able to do using the survey data told us that exurban localities are engaged in interlocal collaboration for service provision. They're using collaboration, they're connecting with their neighbors to provide services more efficiently, higher quality of service, et cetera. But they're not engaging in regional scale planning efforts or regional scale initiatives for sustainability. So the question becomes, how do you get these exurban communities? The ones where, speaking to my colleagues' presentations, right? The ones where where decision-making would have to change in order to support the region to get better outcomes. So my takeaway here is that those current behaviors, exurban communities not participating in these regional scale initiatives, continuing to foster growth, economic development, housing development at the fringes. It's totally rational, right? Given localized and short-term time horizons of political actors in these localities. So how do we move forward? To me, it's a question of how do you get regional level and state actors to use available levers to alter the incentive structures for those exurban communities. I do not have an answer for this question. It is one that I'm currently engaged in, and I'm really curious if our panelists have thoughts on this, about what this would look like or how it might work. And that's all I have. Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it over now to our moderator, Michael Jeans.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Levin College, Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs discussion, specifically the inconvenient truths about suburbanization without growth. I'd like to first thank our researchers and presenters, Drs. Kaufman, Ganning, and Rubidoux. Thank you for the content that you provided, the data behind the conversations, the numbers behind what some of us feel in communities that are either growing or contracting or staying flat. I'd like to introduce our panelists to you briefly. I am President and CEO of Growth Opportunity Partners, also known as Growth Ops. We focus in the areas of advocacy, policy, advising small and mid-sized businesses, as well as providing capital to companies, particularly in urban areas. Now, that being said, we have a wonderful panel ahead for you. And without further ado, I'm going to share each of their names to you in the order that you'll hear from them. And after the final panelist introduces himself, then we'll begin the Q&A session. Today we have Mary Beth Feek, who is Director of Programming and Planning at the Greater Regional Transit Authority, or better known as RTA. Grace Gallucci, the Executive Director at NOACA. We also have Mayor Earl Lycan, former mayor of Shaker Heights, followed by Mayor Mike Summers, former mayor of the city of Lakewood. Mary Beth, if you would, provide an introduction of yourself and also attach your role and your work with some of what we heard from our presenters just a moment ago. Mary Beth?
Sure. My name is Mary Beth Feek. I'm Director of Planning for RTA. And what I deal with is strategic planning for RTA, for our services, for our projects. We've just completed a plan bringing us to 2030, talking about what we should prioritize as we go forward in the next 10 years. We work with everyone. We collaborate with everyone. What we found is that in the next 10 years, our customers and our stakeholders want us to look at serving our customers better and to be more engaged in communities. And what the researchers, what I've heard from the researchers is nothing new. People want to get to jobs far away. People from the city want to get to Solon. It takes an hour and 40 minutes to get to Solon on a bus, and you probably have to take a bus and a train and several buses and trains. The good news is our network is very robust and there are several ways you can get there. The bad news is it's far and it's going to take you over an hour and a half to get there. And that's Solon, there's Brook Park, there's Westlake. It's expensive to run transportation to get people to jobs. And as you saw, there are some inequities in who's taking the bus and where those industries are located. And that's our challenge, to get people there effectively, cost effectively, and within time. So you look at us trying to focus our efforts on priority corridors that are a lot like in the urban areas and suburban areas, going through Lakewood, Shaker Heights, Cleveland Heights, and dense neighborhoods with high propensities for transit and development. I'll stop there.
Grace Gallucci, I'm Executive Director of NOACA. NOACA is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for Greater Cleveland. We represent 5 counties: Cuyahoga, Lake, Lorraine, Geauga, and Medina. And as I reflect on what we're talking about today, first I want to thank Cleveland State for the important work that they do, and I want to thank them for having this forum today. And as we talk about, is this an inconvenient truth? It's more than an inconvenient truth at this point. Suburbanization without growth is a destructive action to the region. You know, we've been having this conversation for more than a decade. If we talk about suburbanization with growth, it's a different conversation. But we saw the trends in the Vibrant Neo work that's culminated in the development of a regional plan. The regional plan says we have to do things differently, or each of the 12 counties in the super region, which is Cleveland, Akron, Canton, Youngstown, would be worse off financially by 2040. I mean, it's basic economics, right? The more infrastructure that's needed as we develop further into undeveloped territory without growth, and if you define growth as increase in population, then you're talking about now having more infrastructure to maintain with the same number of people to maintain it, which results in a higher per capita burden. And without getting into too much ahead of myself, we'll wait for the question and answers. I want to also say that suburbanization of jobs, which then often follows the suburbanization of residents, reduces accessibility and mobility of the region. Jobs and people are farther apart. The transportation system, especially public transportation, becomes inefficient. And recognizing that we have freedom of choice, and this is good. We are the United States of America, and we can vote with our feet. We have a right to live and work where we want, but we don't necessarily have a right to have taxpayers or other people subsidize our choices. So we just need to think about that and think about it in the context of equity. Thank you.
I'm Earl Lycan, the former mayor of Shaker Heights, and together with Mayor Summers, I'm a senior fellow at the Levin College. What I would like to add is that my experience as mayor and the experience of my community very much parallels the themes that you've heard expressed today. Shaker is a very diverse community. We had, according to the last census, about 56% white population, 35% Black, and the rest being a mixture of other groups. We also are very diverse economically. We have a great deal of wealth in the community, but we also have poverty. So when we talk about equity, I'd like to go back to a little earlier period, because I think it's not just a question of suburbanization in the face of a lack of growth. There's actually an issue of suburbanization in the face of decline. My community from 1970 to 2010, based on the censuses, went from a population of 36,000 to a population of 28,000. Cleveland, of course, lost half its population, but Cuyahoga County went from 1,000,007 to 1,000,003. So there was a lot of decline during that area, yet at the same time, there was all this expansion. Hudson tripled, Strongsville and Westlake at the outer ends of Cuyahoga County grew significantly. What happened in my community was during that same 50-year period, the wealthier people got wealthier, the doctors, the lawyers, the business owners, the poorer people got poorer. The results of this were that we did have to deal with significant home demolition. We had to demolish hundreds and hundreds of homes, while in the outer suburbs, more and more homes were being built. That took an enormous effort and enormous resources, both from our city, also from the county. We had to replace a deteriorating shopping center as more and more shopping centers were being built farther out. Ours deteriorated to the point where it had to be replaced altogether. We were just very fortunate to have a developer in our community who was willing to take that on and created our new Van Aken Center. We had to rebuild and replace an aging infrastructure as more and more infrastructures were being built in newer communities farther out. We had to devote enormous resources to replacing ours. Finally, as Megan Rubato suggested, we did engage, and I think it's a characteristic of the inner ring suburbs that we've done that in extensive efforts to collaborate, both through the first ring suburbs. Both Mayor Summers and I shared that, where inner ring suburbs collaborated with each other in joint efforts to deal with our circumstances. We also had a very successful development of a joint dispatch center for police and fire calls, but a failed effort to combine fire departments with another community because of some political problems in the other community. So my experience as mayor, the experience of my community coincides precisely with the themes that were expressed here today. In order to deal with these issues, I think there needs to be a greater focus on growing the region economically, rather than all the individual efforts which each community is making, focusing less on sprawl and more on dealing with what we already have and strengthening that. And finally, looking at these things, not just from a municipal perspective, but very much from a regional perspective, which does require leadership at the regional level. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Summers, former mayor of Lakewood. But I'm also drawing on my perspective as an employer, Summers Rubber Company, a business I owned and operated for 32 years, which had operations in 8 different cities throughout Ohio and Western Pennsylvania. I also worked as a founding board member and past board chair of WireNet, which is now Manufacturing Works, which worked with employers to try and preserve jobs on the west side of Cleveland, manufacturing jobs. And I also think about my experiences with the collaboration as a chair of Ohio's Workforce Policy Board, appointment by Bob Taft, where we worked with employers and employee coalitions to try and figure out how to connect and preserve and grow the workforce piece. And then, of course, as a mayor, it's really a place-based view of the world of all these forces and transportation. So I draw on all those. So I feel like I've been either on the front row seat of the arena or in the arena in these past years. And those experiences help me understand that cities have to compete. They have to have a competition mentality. And if you're on the inner ring, as Lakewood is and Shaker is, and 17 or 15 other cities besides us, in the core cities, we have to take our game up to win the sprawl argument as well. We can't just claim ourselves as victims and say, oh, shame on us that everybody wants to leave. I think part of the opportunity is what can we do to create the conditions that allow folks to want to stay in our communities and not leave, and better still, move back from the exurbs. And we see some evidence of how that's happening in Lakewood and other cities as well. But I would say the root issue that is the seminal event that I know in Lakewood catalyzed exodus, and also I think allows for investment, is public safety. So we can talk about all these important issues and they're all critical, but if people don't feel safe being in our communities, they are not going to have the confidence to invest and stay here. And so we look forward to this event or others to talking about the importance of public safety.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present to you our esteemed panelists for the rest of this discussion. I'd also like to remind you that each panelist's bio can be found on the registration website if you'd like to peruse more for each of their perspectives and backgrounds. And lastly, on behalf of Dean Anglin, the Dean of the College of Urban Affairs, I'd like to welcome each of you to this discussion. Mayor, while I have you, you mentioned in some of our earlier conversations this notion of density versus quality. As we have a dialogue around mobility, flight, and sprawl, there's often a context of densely populated communities, particularly in an environment as we're in today with COVID-19 and the pandemic. Can a municipality have both density and quality?
So I'm challenged by this, and the answer is I believe they can. And by the way, I also believe we must sell that. I've learned, particularly as a mayor, that cities are optimized when they have density. All those investments, as expensive and complicated as they are become much more productive when you have a concentration of people. So when we have limited resource growth, and we do have that here in this region, density creates much more effectiveness and productivity of those resources. So Lakewood cherishes its density, 9,400 people per square mile, nothing quite like it in the region here or the state for that matter. And there's no reason and indication at this point that we are disproportionately unhealthy as a result, but it's really incumbent upon folks to all understand they're in a community and have to be respectful of that. And I would say as a mayor of Lakewood, one of the #1 challenges we faced on a frequent basis was neighbors behaving badly. So the idea that neighbors don't always get along is a truism, unfortunately, and mayors only have so many things they can do to affect that. But the point is, when we work together and create this density, our limited structural assets of money and infrastructure are far more effective and productive. And that's something that we have to continue to work for and sell and understand that it's not a bad thing. And we have plenty of evidence across the great cities across the world that can help us model that.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, like so many communities, there's often prosperity represented in the municipality and in the community, and there's also poverty in the community. And I believe both Lakewood and Shaker have a bit of both. Mary Beth, I'm going to now direct this question to you. As we've discussed the role of transit and the perception of transit, we know that when you have that kind of economic variance, you have different manners in which transit is used. For some, it's a utility and used frequently, perhaps in other geographies, and in other places, it's reserved for those who can't afford other modes of transportation. How do you see us perceiving and using transit in Northeast Ohio? And how should we be perceiving the asset of the regional transit that we have here in Northeast Ohio?
I think some people get it. RTA and Cleveland's network and our assets are the greatest in the state. We have 3 rail lines. We have a world-class BRT. We have trolleys. We have buses. Nobody else in the state has a rail. Nobody has a system as large and robust as ours for this population. You've heard from the experts, our population has been shrinking, yet our infrastructure for the rail, for our buses has not shrunk, and our ability to maintain that because of the scarce economic resources that we have has been stretched. If you look at the population decrease and do some math, you will see that the money that RTA needs has been changed radically just by the population decrease. What does that mean? People, you're right. People do use transit for different things. I'm getting a lot of, we have our downtown people who want to take it to Heinen's from the lakefront or to the game if there were any games played right now. And you've got people who use it for attractions. You have people who use it for work. The folks on our system right now are using it for work. It's really interesting to see while our ridership has taken a beating because a lot of us are not at the office. There's a lot of essential workers who are, and our rides and our routes that serve those are doing very, very well. And that's different than the rest of the country where it is more of a leisure. It is more of a 9 to 5, or now we've got people using our workforce. How people see it, yes, it's essential. Maybe they take it to school. A lot of kids aren't going to school right now, but there is a difference. People like trains better than buses. People love the trolleys, and some of the park and rides that go out to like Westlake and to Euclid and to Strongsville are seeing hardly any riderships, but they're well loved. So there's a problem with the way that people view. I told the story that people want the shelter moved, but they don't want it here. They want it over there. So it's not impacting their business or their home. So it is difficult. You've got some hidden biases that aren't so hidden that you have to deal with every day. But in the end, we are an essential service. We are a great equalizer to get people where they need to go, no matter how much they make or how little they make.
Thank you for that, Mary Beth. Sometimes I think we forget how wonderful some of the assets and amenities are right here in Cleveland, right here in our backyard, that so many other places wish they had or maybe believe they already do. You know, I think of when I was a young boy, I grew up in the First Street in Shaker Heights. And so there was a lot of Shaker I didn't see. And one could argue that to some degree we become what we experience and what we can see, what we can touch. I'm getting to the notion of transit sometimes taking us to places that may be far away from home, or at least for some. And so we get to see different parts of communities. Grace, the next question is directed to you. In all of our exploration regionally here, there are times when folks get to experience parts of the community that are maybe 45 minutes or an hour, and in Cleveland that's far, right, away. And in doing so, there's a thought of maybe I can build here, whether it's a home or a business, but someone architects and sets in motion a mechanism of growth. How do you look at, Grace, growth if one municipality or one community is the beneficiary of said growth, but that growth didn't come from the region, or outside of the region rather? The growth came from a sister or brother city in the community. Is that a good thing? Is it a net gain, or is it something else?
So I think that's exactly what we've been talking about today, and I echo what some of the presenters earlier said, that it's a challenge relative to transportation infrastructure. That means we have to duplicate infrastructure that already exists. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're actually growing in population and you could utilize additional capacity, it makes sense. But in the greater Cleveland area, we already have excess capacity. So we're very fortunate to have a fantastic structure for a transportation system. The network of highways and roadways are far greater in terms of capacity than what's actually needed, thus allowing us to get from one end of the region to another in 45 minutes or an hour. It also allows us to get to most regional assets in half hour, 45 minutes with very little congestion. That's unusual. It puts us in a very positive light nationally when we talk about job access, but there's also costs associated with that when you're duplicating it over and over again. And not just the infrastructure costs of building, say, new roadways or interchanges, et cetera, or adding transportation lines, but it's also a cost that maybe you don't see as much, which is the cost that we call travel time. And it takes longer to get to places, particularly your daily commute. And now you're talking about travel time that is unproductive time. And from an economic perspective, you are lowering or not achieving the maximum capacity of your gross domestic product because you're inefficiently using that time when you could be doing something productive with it. So there are a lot of costs around that, that notion of developing without true growth.
Thank you for that. Mayor Lyken, you have been open and clear about the role of diversity that exists in Shaker Heights and existed while you were mayor. And you also expressed that there needs to be a sense of urgency in how we address some of the challenges that Dr. Ganning outlined as we look at contracting communities and the relative concentration of minority and non-minority residents. There are some trends that occur there. The inconvenient truth is that these trends are not new. And so as you have addressed this, you've addressed it with a sense of urgency. Any thoughts on how we can begin to act as better actors regionally? And are these things that municipalities can solve themselves? Is this a role for mayors and government to solve?
Well, this is clearly a role that needs to be addressed at the regional level, but mayors play a very important part in it. First of all, with respect to the issue of equity and the loss of jobs for residents in the inner core, I know Bob Gleason's doing some important work. I just happened to be on a call with him this morning on the types of businesses and enterprises that are going to be growing in this country. We need to attract more of that to greater Cleveland. We really need to go after that very hard because our problem in many respects, and this impacts the people who have been disadvantaged, is a loss of the kinds of jobs that we had at one time. I'm a native Clevelander. I've seen what's happened. We were a booming economy in the 50s and 60s and up to 1970 or so. And then we lost a lot of the jobs we had, so we need to attract more. So that's one thing that will be helpful. Transit is very important. The booming communities, the Bostons, the Washington, D.C.s, the Chicagos, as good a job as RTA people do, we have a tremendous lack of investment at the state level. In those places, transit will just take you anywhere, and often, usually by rail, fairly quickly. So allowing people in the inner core to get to places where the jobs are, I think, is also important. But the other thing we have to do is what Mayor Summers said, and that is we really have to sell our communities. We have many opportunities to do that because there is an increased interest in walkability. There is an increased interest in urban life. And the more we strengthen our urban areas and our inner ring suburbs, the healthier those communities will be. And that will help everyone, including minority group members. Obviously, there are issues of discrimination that need to be dealt with and addressed in many different areas. And that's all a part of the equity solution as well. But the first thing we need to do is recognize the problem and say we're committed to addressing it. And we're committed to helping those who really have suffered the most as a result of what's happened, as a result of developments.
Absolutely. I believe Dr. Rubidoux speaks to this, and perhaps she'll come back to it in the formal Q&A, but in her work, she speaks to that this can't be the mayor's job alone, that it's the work of all of us, including private sector, to make our local and regional economies work and grow the way we want them to grow, the way they need to grow. I'm going to head back to you, Mayor Summers, because we're talking about what occurs inside of cities and what's under the domain and authority of mayors. Yet there is the side of capital markets and capitalism that can't be ignored, which is competition. My question to you is, can cities both retain and compete? And if so, what do they need to be thinking about to do so?
Yeah, it's a great conversation. And in Lakewood, we tried to address almost every conversation with a second century view of our city and what needs to be different in terms of the first century and what investments do we need to make to reflect that difference. And some of the investments were certainly in the public domain. Our sewers come to mind most boldly, but a lot of them were in the private domain, which is the housing stock. And a house built in Lakewood, fundamentally in 1920, had almost no insulation in it. Its energy performance was awful by today's standard. But the bones are good, but that house is a great example of a second century investment. And that's a private sector view, because that's the homeowner that needs to make that investment. So how can you encourage the private investment that's necessary to actually drive great results, because the public sector is challenged and limited, and also has to be narrowly focused and fair. So I think the answer is by taking this investment view and understanding how we can leverage both public and private, we can then make these cities much more competitive for their second century. And for most folks, they need a bank in order to do that. And if you take a large investment of insulating your house, it's $6,000 or $7,000. For most Lakewood homes, $46,000 median household income. That's not an easily achievable goal, but that house needs to get that investment somehow. So how can we work together to achieve those outcomes so that that house then becomes a competitive instrument for its second century and allows someone living in Avon Lake or Avon to look favorably to coming to our community? Because we do have some of the amenities that they don't have, such as convenience and walkability. And I often love the notion in Lakewood that empty nesters we found were interested in coming back and did. Millennials liked the locality and walkability. And the good news is they had different bedtimes.
Well said. Absolutely well said. Folks, I'd like to thank you for sending some of the questions in. It appears that the Q&A feature is filling with some wonderful questions. So we will be drawing from those as well. Just a reminder, feel free to go to the Q&A box down in the lower right corner of your screen and share any questions that you would like to be presented to the panelists. We may not get to all of them, but we will certainly do our best. And we'll start running through some of these in the interest of time, because if we wait until the formal Q&A, I fear we won't get there. Grace, there's a question that is addressed to you, and it's regarding the highway interchange development. And I know you've shared a bit prior to this discussion about that work. Specifically, the question is, what is NOACA's plan to assess the regional impacts of its proposed new policy on highway interchange development. The writer thinks this is one of the major public policy and funding issues that could have significant impact to improve regional income and racial equity issues. Grace?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And we do believe at NOACA that it could be an extremely important policy, not just that deals with our specific transportation responsibility, that has also impacts relating to economic development and housing, land use, et cetera. We've been working towards an overall long-range transportation plan that we call eNEO 2050, and the E is for equity. And that's sort of at the macro level. And then you'll see that the highway interchange policy is more at the micro level. So we've taken one aspect of the work that we do in terms of planning and say, how can we provide a review or an evaluation of a project to determine whether it belongs in the long range plan or not? How can we do that in a way that is more equitable? Well, first, when we look to equity, we say we need opportunity for all. So what does opportunity for all look like? It looks like, for transportation, mobility and access for everyone. So letting all folks have choices. Modal choice, it does have geographic choice. You're looking at equity in the racial sense, in the economic sense, and looking to make sure that all of the residents of Northeast Ohio can enjoy the benefits of new infrastructure as well as existing infrastructure, and promoting the highest and best use of both limited resources, to the questioner's point, as well as the highest and best use for land overall, because transportation is a significant component of allowing a development to be successful. So we have to think about it. We've got to make sure that all the different criteria that lead to an appropriate information resource for our board members to make decisions, as well as for the public to be able to think about and comment on. So it is something that we're working at and that we do think will be very transformational.
Thank you. And for folks who would like to know more about the interchange policy, is there a place they can go to view?
Yeah, actually, we just had a very well-attended public meeting last evening. But you can go to the NOACA website. We have a special page for the interchange policy that explains a bit about it and provides more resources. It also gives you a form where you can provide your comment on it. So please, whether you have positive comments or not so positive comments, we'd like to hear from you.
Thank you. I'm going to invite our presenters earlier, Drs. Kaufman, Ganning, and Rubidoux back. I'm going to invite them back a bit ahead of schedule as I look at some of the questions that have been offered here. Some are directed to our researchers and early presenters. So as you can, please feel free to join this discussion, and we'll toggle between the Q&A and continued dialogue if that's okay with everyone. Mary Beth, I'm coming back to you because we just heard Grace share a dialogue around equity, about location and place and people, and we can't escape a reality that folks who the locating of people across cities and suburban areas was not a random event. And so whether it was deed restriction or otherwise, there was kind of a funneling of who would end up where, and then a mapping of where jobs would go. And so that results in a physical gap, a gap of proximity from folks who need to get to certain jobs versus those who can easily access those jobs. We have an expanded transit system now in Northeast Ohio that can get you just about anywhere. Now, it may take you longer to get to certain places than others, but we certainly have a more robust transit than we did, say, 30 or 40 years ago. That being said, what's the future of transit? I always say, I want to know the future of a thing because it's that I want to invest in. What's the future of transit, and how do you see that playing out in Northeast Ohio in an equitable way as we pursue growth in the region?
Gosh, open my crystal ball and find out. I think the future of transportation, of public transportation, is working on the assets that we have, which means really giving superb access on those areas, some of our priority corridors, our densely populated areas, the best that we can, and then linking less dense areas with a series of first, last mile, Uber, Lyfts, some sort of demand response in those areas. So for example, you can take the CSU line through Lakewood, you get off at Westgate, and then, or you go all the way to Crocker Park, and then you get an Uber or Lyft that you have a mobile device that you can ticket and get to that too, and that's your trip. So it's more like an airline trip. I think that's one of the ways, keeping transportation clean, safe, effective, and then really helping and collaborating for cities to really see the wisdom of investing on those corridors. Mayor Lyken in his Van Aken district, perfect, created a node at the end of our blue line, which, and with downtown sort of disappearing as a node as much, it really created a nice synergy for us to go for the future and then move out from there. And also to get Portage County and Akron to come into Shaker Heights and then get those folks on our system. So that's what I see. It's going back to our roots. Our roots were every town in America wanted a train station or a transit stop back in the early or late 1800s. And that's where we have to get to. The authentic, from what I've seen after COVID goes away, which God, I hope is soon, we will get back to that authentic, what people want, the Lakewoods, the Shaker Heights, because that's where our roots are.
Yeah, very well said. You know, it's all we can do but have a crystal ball to see what is life after COVID. It certainly has magnified some of the disparities and some of the things maybe we've wrestled with but kicked down the road. And it seems we're at an intersection where we can no longer do that. You can only sprawl so far, and some of that sprawling effort is returning back toward the cities, but the cities are occupied now. When you talk about going back to our roots as municipalities, people follow jobs. That was the migration. And so today the dialogue is more around the quality of the job, not simply a job being the same as any other job. Dr. Ganning, I'm going to thank you for rejoining us on the forum here. There's a question that was presented to you rather early in the session. I believe it was by Abigail or Abby, and the question is, what's the cause of the vacancy multiplier, which you referenced in your presentation, and why does it only happen in shrinking cities? Is that something practitioners are aware of?
Thank you, Abby, for the question, and hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I have some educated guesses about what it is and why it happens, and I believe the vacancy multiplier is an effect of racialized neighborhood processes. So in a growing setting, if you have a vacant unit in a central city, that might be purchased and turned into a non-residential unit into a business, or it could be torn down and built as a new building, or it might be rehabilitated as another vacant unit. But in a shrinking city context, instead we see a vacancy and we go to, I know it's out of fashion now, but broken windows theory and this idea that, oh, this investment is cancerous in a way. And so that leads to other nearby vacancies. And when I mean racialized effects of this, I am talking about the history, the 20th century history we've read so much about the creation of the American ghetto and about the idea of protecting home values and moving away from things that look scary. And we don't see that in a growth context because the market dynamics are very different. As far as I'm aware, the term vacancy multiplier is new. As far as I know, I think I'm introducing it here in the literature. So I don't know that anybody's doing anything with it yet, but I would hope that we can. I would hope that this is the beginning of that conversation rather than the end. Thank you for the question.
Great question, Abby. Thank you, Dr. Ganning. Dr. Kaufman and Dr. Rubidoux as well, I may toss this out to each of our researchers, but certainly starting with Dr. Kaufman. So the models that we've heard from each of you, whether it's the data or the analytics, what's the efficacy of the models as it relates to its application? Can we take any of these models and apply them to the challenges that we've been discussing during this forum and have any measure of success?
So I'll start because you sort of mentioned me first, and my colleagues are around me so they can also jump in. I'm thinking that our model is helping test some of the ideas that I heard, and in fact, I've been taking notes of the questions and of the responses. They generated some ideas for using our model in different ways. This is a tool. In other words, once we come up with a hypothesis about what might help, before we actually implement it, we at least can test what this model is telling us about results and about unexpected negative consequences elsewhere in the region. And then we can decide that maybe those negative consequences are worth taking because we have such excellent results where we are targeting our intervention. Or we might say, well, is there a way to moderate these negative effects and actually get the benefits but mitigate the negative consequences? So it's a tool, and I hope that we'll be able to test, for instance, Ms. Gallucci was talking about transportation policies, and we definitely are going to attempt to include some configurations and test what the impact is on employment. And employment is what you all say actually affects what happens in the region. And so this is a great focus that we could maybe develop for testing and for catching negative surprises.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to jump in on that one?
I would just like to say that the model that you come up with is something that we could utilize in helping to evaluate the nature of the benefits for an interchange or other transportation projects. And so we talked a little bit about that last week, and I'm very excited to get my hands on that tool.
We're ready. We're here for you.
I would just add the modeling that I presented today, right, was sort of distinct in the approach, right? So Dr. Kaufman was showing scenarios, right? Like what could we get if we did things differently in these different ways? Whereas the data that I've analyzed with colleagues, right, shows why are we getting the types of collaboration we are? What types of collaboration are we getting? What types aren't we getting? And who's not doing it? And the answers to those questions they're probably not shocking, but they are really helpful for figuring out how to direct resources and efforts and develop the right kinds of interventions to get the communities that have to be convinced. And I actually, as a political scientist, right, my understanding of the problem, right, is about sort of rational calculations of these actors, and that's what has to change, right? And to me, the politics of that are really difficult. The politics of getting exurban communities on board with regional sustainability are fraught and probably require state or state level action, which is difficult in Ohio. Or some kind of regional scale action that it's hard for me to imagine, but maybe our panelists have ideas. I don't know.
Well, with NOACA being a regional organization, I will say that our diverse board, meaning we've got people from all 5 parts of the region, the counties, we've got mayors, we've got county commissioners. Those folks really work hard to think about things regionally. And what I think would help is, as we think about solutions, to look at both how do we impact the region, but also how do we respect the individual jurisdictions and look at the fact that their residents want something different from residents in different areas. And so it's really a combination and a balance of how do we allow people to have that freedom of choice and be where they want to be without negatively impacting others in another part of the region. And so it's kind of putting those pieces together. And what I find is just doing the work, meaning doing the research, doing the analysis, providing the information, providing the analytics, letting people understand what happens if you do this and what happens if you do that. So scenario planning is where we're going with this. And then once people have that information, these elected officials do, again, a great job of looking at it both regionally and for their own jurisdiction. So I have hope that as we move forward with more regional work, that we have some very positive response. But again, I think it goes back to, we need to respect everybody for what they are as individuals as well as the region.
I would just like to add, if I could, that there are other areas in the country that do a great deal more on a regional basis. I mean, at one end of the spectrum, you have Louisville, which has gone to a regional type of government. But you also have the state of Minnesota that involves revenue sharing among cities. So they're kind of at one end of the spectrum. But on regionalism overall, I think we in this region underperform. That's partly because we have so many cities and it's more difficult. It's partly because of sprawl, which tends to make the exurban communities less involved. But I do think we have a long way to go and that much can be accomplished. I want to point to something that Mayor Summers did when he was chair of the Inner Ring Suburbs Group, the First Suburbs Consortium. He said, let's have each community identify an abandoned property in your community that is a site for potential development, and let's all work together on promoting them. And he can elaborate on that. But that was a way to get everybody involved in everybody else's issue, all working together to get a good outcome. There's much we could do. There are certain services that may be hard to regionalize. There's, I think, all kinds of opportunities to regionalize fire services, for instance, to save dollars. Significantly, fire services, EMS services are much the same from one community to another. I think we could do a lot more in that area, and there are many others.
And I would say that I see a world of haves versus have-nots, and the haves have the capacity to share will never do it willingly. I can't see that world, and the voters in those cities won't do it. So if there, in fact, is going to be some sharing, it's going to have to be a little bit of a power play on the region's part. That's just my honest view sitting in these seats.
Mayor, I'm going to come back to you on that. I know Mary Beth was leaning in, and then I believe Dr. Gleason, you have a comment as well. Mary Beth?
Yes, when Grace was talking about the interchange policy, I happened to be on her transportation committee, subcommittee, and I was there when we were looking at it. And I will tell you, a lot of the county engineers would not say anything. We tried to get them to talk about it. She did it in such a way that it was analytical, the data showed it, and they want interchanges. A lot of people want interchanges. But the facts, the data, there is still, what she does is very difficult because she's got Geauga County and she's got Cuyahoga County and Lorain County and Medina, and they want interchanges, some of them. Some of us see that it's not the greatest thing. So the way you can do it with data, with having everybody part of the solution, and saying, okay, engineers, this is your time. Let's hear it. What do you, they won't say anything. The data is pretty astounding. So getting people to sort of buy into that, to have a process, but in the end, they have a vote, and it's working so far, and the public meeting went fairly well, and let's hope that she gets it passed. But that's just, I think that's an example of what we're talking about, what creates sprawl.
Let me just give an example of a regional power play that Mayor Summers was talking about. The county said to the communities that in the county, we're going to have joint dispatch centers. You're going to need money to fund the cost of new equipment, and we're going to find a way to provide it to you. But in order to do that, we want the cities to line up and come together, so you don't have each city having its own dispatch center for police and fire. Now, that was a relatively easy area to do it in. You don't have the kind of opposition you have for fire services, for instance. But it got done. For the most part, it got done countywide. So it's possible to do that with leadership at the top level.
Indeed. Indeed. I do want to come back to this. There's a bubbling theme that's occurring here that I desperately want to come back to, but I'd like to hear Dr. Gleason's insights as well.
Oh, well, nothing profound. It's just there's a history to these issues. There's also a history to the college's scholarship on these issues. I think a lot of people in our audience, as well as folks here, we could go back through many, many years. I think of the work of Tom Byer. Think of the other folks who have been key to getting the college's mission of getting the community to think deeply about these choices before the choices are made. There's also a great deal of attractiveness to simplifying these issues. We think of the exurb areas as always wanting to sprawl, and the center city areas always wanting to hold everybody in. In every one of these communities, it's been my experience that there are multiple voices. And one of the things that we've learned as a college, both in our scholarship and in our community engagement and all the work of our alumni in this region, is that you often organize a community and discover there are a lot more conversations than there appear to be on the surface. Like the issue of everybody wants interchange, and Mary Beth, I know that's absolutely been my experience. But Grace, I'll pull on some shared experience we've had in previously in the Chicago metropolitan area. Talk about burgeoning, growth-oriented suburbs where if you go into a community and do some organizing before the interchange, you discover that actually most of the people in that community don't want that interchange. They're there, as we said, they have a lifestyle. That's why they're there. Their vision, their American dream is not a bunch of fast food services and big box developments with townhouses nearby where there used to be a cornfield, because it used to be their cornfield, or it used to be their friend's cornfield, or it threatens the future of their ability to have their cornfield or soybean field. So if a lot of the lessons that we've learned working in more densely populated urban areas about the need to organize to really get the community's full word out there and the full impact of what people really want, a lot of those are easily transferable to suburban and exurban settings as well, but often not done. And we are one urbanized area, and all of those skills of getting community action aligned with community aspirations apply in all these different parts of our region.
Yeah, thank you for that, because this is precisely where I wanted to go. I think, Dr. Rubidoux, you started us down this path, but I've heard it from each of you. And so I'm going to expand on a question that was an early question in the Q&A that is consistent with where this conversation is headed. So look, folks, we've got the hood up on the car. We are ripping out cords and cables, and we're having a very honest conversation, not necessarily just about the effects, but the causes of the conditions that we find ourselves in today. And I think we can have that conversation, right? This is the city's college. This is the College of Urban Affairs. And so, Mayor Summers, you said that the haves will not necessarily, give up willingly or take on some of these efforts willingly. And I think there's, you know, a large degree to some yes there, and maybe some other folks who in this philanthropic community have done maybe a better job than others. But for the most part, there is this notion of how do resources get applied equitably? The question that was presented is, do we have the collective expertise to change the trajectory of the city and the entering city? And the precursor to that for me is, do we have the appetite? Do we, if we're honest about why there is sprawl, there's typically a destination set that's often less about the destination and more about the place where those folks are sprawling from. Sorry to end the sentence with a preposition. This is college, for goodness sakes. But there's intentionality there. And so folks don't end up sprawled by surprise. There's a value conversation here. It's how we value each other. Mayor said that folks need to feel safe. And sometimes there's a perception of not being safe around certain people or in certain neighborhoods. And so this exodus that we're discussing is in part geographic, but frankly, it comes down to, Dr. Gleason, as you shared, it comes down to how we feel about each other. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to put this out to the group. I get to sit back. My job is to get out of the way. But as we think about the impetus and what catalyzes sprawl, but maybe isn't talked about, it's how we view one another. So the two-part question here is, how do we get people to spend enough time together, perhaps as children, to have enough body of experiences that refute some of the ignorances they may hear along the way about a variety of people that causes them to assign value? And then secondarily, that's the people side of it. On the leadership side, do we have the political will and expertise to carry this much water so that we can be a thriving, growing community?
So let me just say, Hunter, your report should be the focus of that conversation. That mayors come and go, and but this must not be lost. So I think the opportunity for our region is to understand that great regions and cities look like X. We don't look like X. Here's the gap. And here's what we need to do to close the gap. And the benefit of the haves and why they should share is because they win when we look like a great city. And so part of it's the salesmanship that says, look, if you think you're doing fine out here on the exurb and keeping all your treasure, think again, because there's a day of reckoning, and that's sooner than we think. So the reality is we need to do it differently. And this report, which is a fabulous report, should be, I mean, it's the case and the game plan. And so our opportunity, I think, in the region is to not lose sight of this and keep going to school on it, because all the components are there. There's plenty of improvement everywhere. And I think politically, we can all draw comfort from it.
Yeah, can I add something? I'm a geographer and demographer, and something that needs to be understood throughout the region, our citizens, in fact, as well as our political community, is that the growth of the suburbs, the suburban counties around Cuyahoga, the population growth and even the jobs is directly attributable to the loss of population and jobs in Cuyahoga County. The people who are moving from Cuyahoga County to those adjacent communities are basically subsidizing the growth. Without that population moving from Cuyahoga into those surrounding counties, their net migration would be a loss. They are losing population to out of the region, to elsewhere, other states, other parts of Ohio, or whatever. They're losing quite a bit of population in some cases. The only reason they are actually growing in population, they would be proud to say they're growing in population, is because they're getting them from Cuyahoga County. This is something that was used in the analysis that the Sustainable Communities Consortium put together, talking about that it's also the households are growing and not the population numbers that are growing. And therefore the demand for new housing out there in Medina, et cetera, is driving this sprawl that we're talking about. It's not so much population, it's really the demand of new households that's creating demand for housing. And this has been pointed out for a decade or two, actually. And I'm glad to see that it's part of our planning process that was implemented. It's being implemented in Northeast Ohio.
Thank you.
You know,
I'm going to jump in real quickly. Dr. Ganning was going to provide a response here as well. And I know we're running close on our time. So Dr. Gannon may be the last voice before my final introduction. So I wanted to be sure to create that space. Dr. Ganning?
Thank you so much. And Mark, you're absolutely right. We actually have a loss in population, but a decreasing average household size, which is how we conjure up more households. But I want to respond to this question of what we do to overcome these deep divides in our region and why we continue to sprawl and how we change hearts and minds about what's happening, because the history and the policy of how we've arrived at where we are today are incredibly important to this conversation. We have at least a century, if not more than that, of urban policy that is incredibly racist at every turn. And we have created deep segregation. We have created pockets of incredible investment and disinvestment. Redlining is only a portion of that. And interestingly, if you look back at the history around the development of the interstate system through Cleveland, there were portions of it that had public conversation, and there were portions of it for which there is virtually no record of public conversation at all. It just happened that people from the state or federal government came in, transportation engineers came in and said, we think there should be a highway here, and then there was a highway there. And in Cleveland, there was a rule that you weren't even allowed to move your house, that you were required to allow it to be torn down for roads because they wanted you to move into a house someplace else. But my point here is that the conversations around these things, a lot of it didn't happen. And we still today have a legacy of transportation engineering that is unduly focused on mobility rather than on accessibility, which is perhaps a topic for another day, but the distinction between the two is significant. And when we're talking about issues of racial equality, and we're talking about job accessibility, that distinction is important. And I'm so happy to hear that the engineers were maybe a little bit uncomfortable at this committee meeting that Mary Beth and Grace were at, and I would love to hear more about that. But undoing this, unzoning the redlining, getting past all this and seeing each other, coming to this conversation with open hearts and open minds is a very profound thing that I don't think it's possible for it to happen without an appreciation of how we got here. And a lot of my work has been criticized for, not a lot, but what I presented today has been criticized for not considering why people move, for instance. Well, maybe somebody moved to Mentor because they like the schools or they like the community or something. But the creation of, and not to pick on Mentor, but the creation of various communities that have good schools or have profiles you like, or so what, and so forth and so on, started from a set of policies and processes that origin story is significant, and we can't ignore those and come away from this productive. So I hope, Michael, that's where you were hoping I would go with this, but if not, feel free to follow up and I'll cede the floor.
Absolutely, and I think that was the perfect close to a wonderful conversation. I almost get the impression that this is not the last conversation that we're going to have on this topic, and that we're going to have progress conversations, and we'll be intentional about the outputs that we want to see in the community. As a member of the Levin College of Urban Affairs Visiting Committee and a board member of the Cleveland State University Foundation, it is my honor to join or moderate this group of esteemed panelists and researchers. Ladies and gentlemen, if we were in front of one another, I have no doubt that we would hear a rousing round of applause. I would also suggest that if you'd like to hear more from this group, feel free to email the college and share so. We don't want to have polite conversations for the sake of polite conversations, but there's something to be said for civil discourse. There's something to be said for us working together. Hunter Morrison, I don't know how we could have you on the line here and not unmute you so that you can take half an hour to wax poetic about everything we've discussed. That being said,
Don't have half an hour, Michael.
I've taken a minute of your time already. There was a question in the Q&A regarding the harmful effect of, and it looks like we've already addressed that question for the most part, so we're good here. Ladies and gentlemen, my time with you has come to a close, and I'd like to thank each of you for participating and joining. For the remaining 10 minutes, we will hear from Hunter Morrison. Most of you do not need an introduction from me to Hunter. But Hunter today is a senior fellow at the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs here at Cleveland State University. Can't think of anyone else to close us out with words of wisdom and insight. Hunter, the floor is yours.
It's a privilege to be with the group today and to engage in a very rich and robust discussion about issues of great concern. And I want to thank Drs. Kaufman and Salling and Ganning and Rubidoux for taking the time and the energy to focus on and provide data and insight on key aspects of our shared trajectory in Northeast Ohio. I want to thank Mayor Summers and former Mayor Lycan for the work they're doing, and they continue to do, but the engagement that they had in the creation of Vibrant Neo 2040, which became, and I'm glad to see Mike Summers refer to it as a foundational document, our best effort to look at the region as a whole. And as Grace Galucci often reports, it did win the 2015 Daniel Burnham Award, the highest award from the American Planning Association that year for the plan. And it's incumbent upon us to put it to work. And I think we are in our own way doing that. And finally, to thank Mary Beth Feek for the work of RTA, and particularly for Grace Galucci for doing the very, very hard work of putting these insights to work in an organization that is ecumenical geographically and politically in a 5-county portion of our 12-county region. Having been president of NOACA several times, I know how hard this is to get regional collaboration and regional cohesion around issues that are heartfelt by individual politicians and communities as to when is their turn. Michael made an important point at the end, which is this has been a conversation that is necessary. It is ongoing. This is a big, complex region, and I'm going to suggest that there are a couple of areas we may want to focus in on. Number one, this has been a very rich discussion, and I hope we will have this as recorded, but perhaps it can be transcribed. Perhaps we can pull out some of the key ideas because there was a whole range of ideas and determine how best to work on it going forward. But my key recommendation is that the conversation needs to be expanded. I had the privilege of running a 12-county planning effort over a 4-year period and getting to understand the complexity of our region. About half of the 400 plus communities in Northeast Ohio are townships, and the townships are not at the table. The townships are where the growth is occurring. The townships have the weakest capacity to zone, to control their fate. And as Bob Gleason would point out, if you sit down over at the bar or at the kitchen table and talk to trustees about what really is going on, not every community views growth as positive, as change as positive. They like the way they like the rural charm. They don't necessarily want to become a subdivision, even though that's what their zoning may say. They have very limited control over that. And so engaging those communities in the discussion. One of the key insights that we got, and perhaps the most profound insight, is the fiscal impact of this set of growth decisions on the fiscal health of all of the communities. It's not just about the central city. It's about what happens to Geauga County as it urbanizes and has to go from chip and seal roads to real roads with sewers and water lines, and forget the wells. You've got to, and septic tanks, you've got to urbanize, and what happens to the Amish? So you get into those discussions about the quality of life in a place like Geauga County or southern Medina County or western Lorain County, you find that people like what they have and want to preserve and protect that too. So townships need to be at the conversation. So does the business community. Grace brought up an important point about locational efficiency. And there have been some businesses, and I think we all know them, who made the decision to move out and found they couldn't employ and attract millennial workforce that wanted to live in downtown. Being out in Chagrin Highlands was not necessarily an asset in terms of labor force recruitment. And we've seen pre-COVID, we've seen companies relocate some of their operations downtown. How do we engage the chambers of commerce, the Greater Cleveland Partnership, the business community generally, the commercial real estate community, in looking at ways in which we can link and leverage the asset of our transit system, the asset of our vacant land, and the asset of our freeway points of access to find sites that are more locationally efficient on land in existing communities. How do we look at quality connected places across the region? How do we work with townships and other smaller communities to preserve and protect what they have and link those? And how do we remove the barriers, the inherent barriers that the state has put in place, some of it intentional, some of it just, it is the way it is, that make it difficult for transit systems to collaborate across county lines to link transit systems in Cleveland and Akron and Canton in a two-way commute, or transit systems in Cleveland and Medina and Lake County, so that people in Cleveland and Euclid and other communities can take advantage of jobs that are further out there. How do we expand the table? How do we expand the conversation? I was very pleased to hear from Mayor Summers about using Vibrant Neo as a template. It is something that we all worked on. It passed unanimously on a board of 35 entities representing the 12 counties and those 400 communities. And it is something that the college has taken seriously. How can we use that to engage each generation of new public officials in understanding the challenges we face, not just in the core cities, not just in the first suburbs, but in the areas that are developing? Because the fiscal impact we found of development, that the life cycle cost of the infrastructure that's necessary to accommodate the growth that's projected in a place like Geauga County or Western Lorain County or Medina County comes at a cost. And it drives the performance of all of our communities, all of our counties down, so that the best performing county in the beginning of our planning period winds up worse than the worst ones today. And finally, I'd say the Cuyahoga County, go online, look at what we were able to do in terms of countywide reports. But the biggest swing of doing things the same way, the biggest pain happens in Cuyahoga County, which has all the assets, all the core assets. The biggest swing in terms of development impacts, the positive development impacts, come from Cuyahoga County being able to compete within the region and the communities within Cuyahoga County as locations of choice for businesses and households. It's an absolute necessity that Cuyahoga County not wind up at the bottom of the barrel, which is what the projections suggested. So in conclusion, thank you all for participating in this. This has been a robust discussion, and I'm hopeful that we can review the transcript and move forward together, expand the table, expand the conversation, understand their shared pain and their shared gain by collaborating, and make the proposition that Dr. Roboto made very clear. The value proposition of collaboration is hard to make. Perhaps we can make it around what we share together. Thank you again.